All right, open your Bibles with me, please, to Luke 21. We'll begin with verse 5. Luke 21. I'm going to skip in a few moments a fair amount of the material about the trial of Jesus. I don't think Luke is so very different from Mark and Matthew on that part. We're just trying to get highlights here. So I'll show you as we get there what we'll do. I do want to deal with some of the time on the cross because Luke deals with that a little bit differently from the two we've already dealt with. Let's pray. God, this is a beautiful October morning in Tulsa, and we're grateful for it. We're so grateful that we've come through the hottest days of summer and fall seems to be here. We are still praying for more significant rain. We have many on our hearts, some who have really good things happening to them and others who are having a hard time. Now we open your book and we look for Luke's insights into your Son, our Lord, what we are to know, how we are to live because of what we know, and pray that you will give us divine guidance. In Christ's name, amen. Okay, this morning we're going to deal with Luke's understanding of the apocalypse. There were many people living in that first century of the Common Era who believed that history was about to come to an end, that God had just about had it with human beings and he was about to rain down history. Ancient folk did not understand natural phenomena as well as we understand today. I mean by that earthquakes. They didn't really know what caused them. Violent storms. Today we do know what causes earthquakes. We can't predict accurately just when one is going to occur, but we know where the major fault lines are around the planet. We can tell where the great tectonic plates bump up against each other and where there's a grinding north and south sometimes, east and west sometimes, overlap sometimes, buckling up sometimes. Can't predict accurately yet just when it's going to occur, one of those earthquakes, but we know what causes them. We know what causes hurricanes. We can't stop them, but we can predict with much greater accuracy where they're going once they get started. Our satellites now can tell us much more about jet streams and where the jet streams are moving at any given time. And these great storms out in the Atlantic, sometimes Pacific, we understand why they're being steered the way they are. The jet stream action and so on. There's a big Category 4 hurricane right now that's moving up the Atlantic coast, but it's way out to sea. So only ships at this point need to be concerned about it. It seems to be going completely away from all land masses, moving up toward the North Pole, going even east of Bermuda. So we understand. They did not understand. We understand when we have eclipses of the sun and the moon. They didn't understand those either. They experienced them, but they didn't know why there were these darkening times when the sun was blotted out or the moon was blotted out. So they tried to make sense of that. But I remember reading years ago when I was reading about how to deal with children at a time of grief, at a time of divorce and so on. How do you help children get through that experience? And one scholar said something that I found really helpful and I've never forgotten it. Children are very good observers. They are very poor interpreters. Almost inevitably, they think they're responsible. If there's a divorce, they think they're responsible. The younger they are, the more likely they are to think they're responsible. Sometimes, if dad just disappears, mom just disappears, or one dies, Even though nobody has ever said this to them, they imagine somehow they were responsible for that death or that divorce and so on. Okay, ancients tried to make sense of these natural phenomena, and they didn't always get it right. Now imagine how devastating it was to people in the Middle East when the Romans decided they had had all of the insurrection they intended to deal with around Jerusalem, and they decided to destroy the city. They destroyed the temple, that second temple, rebuilt 500 years before, greatly enhanced by Herod the Great. He had the resources to pour more gold and silver and bronze into the temple so that it was more nearly the temple that Solomon had built. And then gone again. All gold, all silver, all bronze stripped out of the temple, burned to the ground. And of course the Jews never have had a temple on the Temple Mount since then. Never. Since the year 70 of that first century. It changed Judaism forever. Forever. After 70, the Jews have never had animal sacrifice as a part of their religion. In no part of the world have they ever had animal sacrifice again. The locus, they call it the locus of God's presence. I mean, they knew they couldn't contain God in the temple at Jerusalem, but it was the place, they said, where God had put his name, and so it was a very significant place. All observant Jews were to go at least 3 times a year for the 3 most important occasions to the temple in Jerusalem. It was gone forever, it seems. It's not back almost 2,000 years later. There is no temple there. So all of the activity moved to the synagogue. And from priests who had administered all these rites of sacrifice and how animals had to be sacrificed, even the wine offerings and the olive oils and all the things that they brought to sacrifice, gone. That's never been the function of rabbis. The word rabbi in Hebrew and the word that's translated rabbi for us in Greek means teacher. Not sacrificer of animals or any such thing. Teacher. That's what Charles Sherman is. That's what Mark Fitzerman is. That's what rabbis all over the world are. Teachers. Not sacrificers. Not priests. Okay? So it changed Judaism forever. It changed Christianity too. And those who wrote the stories of Jesus had to somehow deal with the fact that something catastrophic had occurred in the year 70. And we know that the Gospels are written after that time. So they have to comment on that, if you would. They have to have some opinion about what all of that meant. The destruction of the temple in Jerusalem and destruction of much of the city of Jerusalem in the year 70. Changing of Judaism forever. But not even Christians. Neither did Christians have a place of reference at all up there on the Temple Mount. Gone forever. So how they interpreted those events. So here you have scholars really choosing up sides. There are some who study the 4 Gospels and decide that Jesus believed the end was coming very soon. But there are others, and Dr. Brandon Scott, who came to give our Barton Clinton Gordy series, is one of those who believes Jesus was not an apocalyptic prophet, that he didn't predict the end time at all. That in fact the authentic sayings of Jesus, the teachings that have been preserved that are truly authentic, they believe were the ones where Jesus says, I have no idea. The Father has not revealed this to me. Just live every day the way you're supposed to. Be observant, be alert, be about your Father's business every day. And the end time will take care of itself. So, depending on which church you go to, where your clergy got educated or failed to get educated, and you come up with a different rendering here. Okay? You're not asking for names, are you? I could supply them. Some Methodists, but we won't go there this morning. All right, verse 5. When some were speaking about the temple, how it was adorned with beautiful stones and gifts dedicated to God, Jesus said, As for these things that you see, the days will come when not one stone will be left upon another, all will be thrown down. When Luke writes, that's already happened. It's happened. Now, remember that Jesus grew up at Nazareth. In the past, when we had been to Israel, there was really no place that we could take people to see something like the village where Jesus grew up. Nazareth is now a city of 80,000 people. Crowded, noisy, predominantly Palestinian, who are not particularly kind to Jews or Christians, who have attitude. This year when we were going into Nazareth, they saunter out in front of the bus to keep us from going. They don't get in a hurry, hands in pockets and so on. They make life difficult for you. 80,000 people there, most of them not Jews. And it's a very different place from when Jesus grew up. So I'd heard that a little reenacted village had been built there for Christians primarily, so we could see more realistically what the village looked like when Jesus lived. And so we saw it. It's right on in one of the suburbs almost. But they've built big high fences around it, so you feel it's quiet. And little goats and burros and, cows. And a few people spinning and weaving and so on. It was, I thought, very helpful. The disciples of Jesus came from similar little villages. Those of you who've been to Israel with us or with someone else, and you've seen Capernaum ruins now reenacted. The Roman Catholics have done a great job with that, but it still was a village. You can see it, just a little village sitting right on the bank of the lake there. And where Mary of Magdala came from, a little village. They were so tiny that sometimes they were just 2-3 miles apart. Most people had to walk from one place to another. So they built them close together. So here in Magdala, there Capernaum and so on. Little tiny villages. So can you imagine, those of you who've been to Jerusalem, when you see those stones down at the bottom of the western wall, used to be called the Wailing Wall. Jews don't call it that anymore because they don't have to wail. They can walk right up to it and stick their prayers in the cracks. The stones are taller than most of us. One stone. And huge, massive, piled on the others. And those who saw the temple, that first one that Solomon built, or the second one that Hezekiah got built, not Hezekiah, those who returned from the Babylonian captivity. But it had to be fairly plain. They didn't have many resources. Herod the Great restored it. Gold and silver and bronze. Beautiful. Gleaming up there on the top of the hill. So people from a little tiny village of burros and goats. We were with our grandchildren at the state fair Friday night, and I was pointing out to them when we saw the little Sicilian donkeys. They always call them the little Sicilian donkeys. And I was saying to Parker, who's 14 now, I said, Parker, can you imagine Jesus riding on one of those down the hill into the city on Palm Sunday? He thought the little animal was too little. That was not kind to ride on such a little animal. And I said, well, they're stronger than they look. The little burros carried heavy loads most of the time, and Jesus would not have been any heavier than what they carried from time to time. Anyway, a little village suddenly, wow, look at these buildings. And as Luke and Mark and Matthew, the synoptics, tell the story, this is the first time the disciples have been there. John says they'd been there before. We don't know for sure. John says this was their third trip. But as the synoptics tell it, if this is their first good look at Jerusalem, wow, they were amazed and impressed. But by the time Luke writes, any of those who read his account or hear it read to them, if they ever get to go to Jerusalem, there is going to be nothing sitting up there on the hill. Nothing. They ask him, Rabbi, when will this be? What will be the sign that this is about to take place? And he said, beware that you are not led astray. For many will come in my name and say, I am he. The time is near. Do not go after them. When you hear of wars and insurrections, do not be terrified. These things must take place first, but the end will not follow immediately. Then he said to them, nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes in various places, famines and plagues, and there will be dreadful portents, and that means usually things in the sky, eclipses, again, which they didn't understand. They thought the earth was the center of the universe. They thought the sun went round the earth every 24 hours. That's what they believed. But portents, things in the sky that they didn't understand, that were frightening to them, of course, because they did not understand that we've just had the moon get between the sun and the earth, and it seemed to block out the sun. Or the earth has gotten between the sun and the moon, and it blacked out the moon. They didn't understand. There will be dreadful portents and great signs from the heavens. But before all this occurs, in other words, Luke is saying, Jesus wanted those who follow him to focus on where you are, what's happening to you. Before all this, whatever these signs that you think mean something and may mean absolutely nothing, they will arrest you and persecute you. They will hand you over to synagogues. That's interesting, you see. In a synagogue, these followers of Jesus would have been considered blasphemers. I mean, Jews believe there is only one true God, and he never ever came in human form. I mean, Greeks had stories about gods and humans cavorting with each other, and Romans had stories about humans and gods cavorting with each other, but not Jews. And so they were sometimes tried in the synagogues for blasphemy. That's what that means. And prisons. You will be brought before kings and governors because of my name. Paul, of course, had been imprisoned at Caesarea long before Luke writes. Spent 3 years there, during which time they just forgot about him, that he was even there in prison, before he finally could appeal his case and get on to Rome. But this will give you an opportunity to testify. The word can also mean simply to witness. Make up your minds not to prepare your defense in advance. You ever heard preachers say that God just tells them what to say? Oh, I did. I grew up in East Texas where there were folks, who got saved and ordained in one night. My barber did. From the time I was a toddler, and my mother would give me a little push into the barber shop, and she would go shopping. She knew these men were perfectly safe, and I would go in and take my seat. And I remember they used to say, wow, he always knows who's ahead of him and who's not ahead of him. And I'd crawl up in the chair and they'd cut my hair. And the guy that cut my hair got saved and ordained in one night. Kept cutting hair 5 days a week. And then on Sunday he got up and said whatever the Lord told him to. I think if I'd done that for 31 years here, you probably would have gotten tired of whatever I thought the Lord was telling me first thing on Sunday morning. So don't think that's what was in mind here. Don't think these are words for preachers of the 21st century. But Jesus is saying, Luke is saying, Jesus said these things to you, that God will help you. If you are one of those who's imprisoned for being a follower of Jesus of Nazareth, he will help you know what to say when the time comes. Our young American in Italy, Perugia, Amanda, is going to have one last chance to plead her own case in the morning in front of 2 Italian judges and 6 lay people. And her father was being interviewed this morning while I was shaving, from Perugia, and saying, oh, Lord, I hope she's got the right words to plead her case. And he said, one of the hardest things is Amanda's now been in Italy long enough, she will plead her case in Italian. And her father doesn't understand. So he didn't even know what she's saying when she's saying it. But of course, he's so anxious Because probably by late tomorrow, those 2 judges and 6 jurors are going to decide if the first verdict was wrong, that the forensic evidence shows she was nowhere close to the murder scene that night, and she may be flying home Tuesday morning, or she may spend the next 30, 40 years in an Italian prison. And all the experts from the United States say the forensic evidence is so clear that she was not anywhere near the murder scene, but they've been trying her in all the newspapers of Italy, so we'll see. Nonetheless, when it comes your turn to plead your case as a follower of Christ, of course that's what Luke's talking about, not whether you committed murder or not, you don't have to go to elaborate lengths here, constantly worrying about what you'll say in that moment. When you defend your following Jesus of Nazareth, he will help you know what to say. I will give you words and a wisdom that none of your opponents will be able to understand or contradict. You will be betrayed, even by parents and brothers, by relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death. All of that had happened before Luke writes, you see. You will be hated by all, and that's a little over, I got a feeling Luke wrote that, by all because of my name. You may feel like everybody in the whole world's against you. And then this sentence, but not a hair of your head will perish, means be gone forever. By your endurance, you will gain your souls. Okay? Just in case that wasn't enough, skip to verse 25. There will be signs in the sun, the moon, the stars, and on the earth distress among nations, confused by the roaring of the sea and the waves. See, they didn't understand big storms. They didn't understand hurricanes, water spouts, tornadoes. People will faint from fear and foreboding of what is coming upon the world, for the powers in the heavens will be shaken. But then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud. Here's one of Luke's favorite words, with dunamis, with power, great glory, bright, bright light. Now when these things begin to take place, stand up, raise your heads, because your redemption, remember that's a slave market term, you've been bought back. You've been bought back by the one who created the heavens and the earth. Okay? So look at verse 34. Be on guard that your hearts are not weighed down with dissipation and drunkenness and the worries of this life, and that day catch you unexpectedly like a trap. For it will come upon all who live on the face of the whole earth. Be alert at all times, praying that you may have the strength to escape all these things that will take place and to stand before the Son of Man. If you've visited with persons who've battled cancer, if you've had a family member who's battled cancer, what do they tell you they've learned? Cherish every day. Cherish every day. Eric Green, a past chair of our administrative board, was diagnosed with multiple myeloma. He was told by oncologists that the #1 treatment facility in America for multiple myeloma is in Little Rock, Arkansas. You know why? Because Mr. Sam Walton had it, and he had a lot of money. Think Walmart, okay? So, Little Rock, Arkansas, for this one particular kind of malignancy, they have perhaps the best treatment center in America. And so Eric and Beth were told they needed to take one of the apartments at that medical center, which is kept as nearly germ-free as any environment can be kept, because they take you almost to death and then readmit some stem cells and so on and hope and pray. Eric's doing wonderfully well. He spoke, gave his testimony to his Sunday school class, his and Beth's, that's the Maranatha class, one Sunday, after they said, you seem to be, at this point, cancer-free. You know what he said he learned? Cherish every day. That's what he told Maranathas, cherish every day. I think that's what Jesus is saying. I think that's what Luke is writing. Don't be afraid all the time. I read an article, and you're probably going to hear this in a sermon soon, but there was a very interesting article in the Wall Street Journal this past week saying that because of the news coverage we have nowadays, one may think we're living in the most dangerous period in history, when in fact we're living in one of the most peaceful times humans have ever known, percentage-wise. And they pointed out various times in history where when you woke up in the morning, chances were you were going to a 15% chance you were going to die a violent death. Some tribe's going to come riding into your village. Somebody's going to club you and take your wife and daughters and so on. 15% chance. Your chances today are less than half of 1%. Huge drop-off, actually. Your chances of being killed violently. At the hand of someone else. Anyone else. It's a whole study that's been done, and I may deal with that some more. Because we hear so much of bombings and killings and knifings and shootings, and they do happen. But when you consider how many people there are on the planet, sort of like that debris falling from the sky the other day, your chances of being hit by some of that debris, you probably saw those numbers, about the same as your chance of winning a lottery. That sort of thing. Okay. I think Dr. Brandon Scott would say, Jesus is telling you the kingdom is about how you live today, how you understand God's presence with you today. But through the Bible we have this is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in this day. You should climb in your bed at night and think, I gave this day the best I had. I've heard enough of those people say that I usually begin my prayers just before I sleep every night by saying, God, thank you for Saturday. That was yesterday. Last night. After I'd brushed my teeth and all, and I climbed in the bed and it turned out the light, I started, God, thank you for Saturday. And I went back over our day. I was glad I got to sleep a little later. It's the one day of the week if I get to sleep a little bit later, it's on Saturday. I did yesterday. We went to lunch. Our two sons and their families know I'll buy Mexican food on Saturday, anybody that wants to eat. No problem if they don't want to. So yesterday, one daughter-in-law had to work. Our physician daughter-in-law was working. And the two grandsons were not there with us yesterday, but the other 9 of us were together. So that was fun, 9 of us. And then we saw our youngest, our 4-year-old, play soccer. Her team won 8-2, and she kicked 6 of them. She's this big. She is this big. We played a team recently that had a little girl this tall almost that was running in and out around our girls. But our little Chase is this big. And Jason said when the game was over, can you imagine the other team saying, well, if we could just get rid of that little blonde, with her ponytail flying. At one time, the coach pulled her out. She was sitting there with her daddy and me under the umbrella to be shaded a little bit. And the other team scored their second goal. She's 4. She turned to her daddy and said, they need to put me back in. And last year, you had to lead her out on the field with her crying. She was so teary last year. And this year, she's got it. Okay, so I was thanking God. We got to see our little 4-year-old play soccer, and she had a good time. And then we got to see our little 6-year-old play soccer, and she had a great time, too. Her team did well. Had a great time. And then Gail and I went to work out. And that was good. We're trying hard to keep ourselves in the best shape we can at this point in our lives. And then I had a quiet evening by myself. I'm going over the sermon 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Point 1, illustrated. Point 2. Every Saturday night. Sermon was finished by Friday at noon, but I'm going over it, see if I can remember it. See if I can remember it now. So I just went, sort of hour by hour, thanking God. Tonight, I'll thank Him for Sunday. And I'll start with the first service and then Sunday school and the second service. And later this afternoon, lunchtime. Those that want to, any family show up at church, I'll take to lunch. So they won't all be there today, but some will be. And I'll be grateful. I will enjoy that very much. It's funny, how the little girls, the little ones now are the sort of funny ones. And the 6-year-old's always, she notices where I sit when we get to lunch. And one time she said, "Granddad, why do you always sit in that chair?" I said, "It's the Papa Bear chair. It looks just like the others. It looks just like the others where we go eat." And so one Sunday, somebody had sat in that chair when I got through the buffet line, and so I sat in another one. She said, "Granddad, you didn't sit in the Papa Bear chair." And I said, "Oh, yeah, wherever I sit is the Papa Bear chair." And she laughed. She thought it was funny. Okay, all I'm saying is, I think that's what Jesus is trying to say to us. I think that's what Luke is trying to say to us. There are things that happen sometimes we don't understand. But whether we're sick or well, whether we've been through some catastrophic illness and come through on the other side, could we not be grateful for the day and cherish the day? And not be so focused on what we didn't get done yesterday or what somebody did to us yesterday or what we may or may not accomplish tomorrow. Just cherish the day. Sunday ought to be its own wonderful day. And then Monday we go back to work or whatever we need to do. Okay. I really think that's all Jesus and Luke are trying to tell us about the future. God will be there when you wake up the next time. God will be there, and God will help you do what you need to do. Cherish the day. All right, let's go on to chapter 23, if that's okay with you, and let's skip to verse 32. As we went through Mark's account, I reminded you many times that Mark's account is the oldest. Scholars are, I think, generally agreed on that. I know the best ones in our seminaries are. Mark's oldest, Mark is briefest, and so Mark gave us no words of the cross, from the cross. We talk about the 7 last words, okay? But to get the 7, you have to pull them all together. All 4 accounts you have to pull together. So let's see what Luke has to say about that. I mean, here's the crucial time now when Jesus is dying on the cross. 2 others also who were criminals were led away to be put to death with him. When they came to the place that is called the Skull, Golgotha, they crucified Jesus there with the criminals, one on his right, one on his left. Now, Mark didn't give you this. Luke gives you this. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them. They do not know what they are doing." He prayed for those who were crucifying him. Those who early that morning had screamed to Pilate, "Crucify him, crucify him." Scholars like Father Crossan, Dominic Crossan, and others say they are convinced that the people who came down the hill with Jesus on Palm Sunday were not the ones screaming, "Crucify." Sometimes preachers say the very ones who cheered him on one Sunday were screaming, "Crucify him" on Friday. Scholars say that's not so. And we've been to Israel 6 different times, and we've seen the model of the Jerusalem. Because this is a Jewish city, it's called Jerusalem of King Herod's time. But, of course, that's Jesus' time, too. And so for us Gentile Christians, it's Jerusalem of Jesus' time. And every time the archaeologists find any little thing, as they continue to dig in the old city, if they find anything about that model that's not just right, they change it. They correct it. It's now been moved. It was sort of on the edge of the city of Jerusalem. It's now been moved right into the heart to the Jerusalem Museum. And I told you there's a big white marble placard on the wall, and it has listing not so very many names of people who give at least $100,000 a year to keep up the Jerusalem Museum. And one of them is Schusterman, Tulsa, Oklahoma. Yep. It's really well done. And so you can see this model. And so the temple is, waist high, maybe? Probably waist high. That's the scale of it. And so you can see the Antonius fortress where Pontius Pilate was spending the week. And you can see the courtyard very clearly. Not very big. Not very many people could get in. And scholars are convinced these were either the powerful Sadducees who didn't want to ruffle the feathers of the Romans, who had things going their way. They were the landed folk. They were the moneyed folk. They just wanted peace. And if this guy from up country was causing all this trouble, we got to get rid of him. We got to crucify him. Different group of people. So Jesus may be praying for the Romans, soldiers who are doing what they were told to do. He may be praying for the mob early on Friday morning, whoever they may have been. He might have been praying for them, praying for us. Remember, the word forgive in English comes from a German word. Jesus isn't speaking German, of course. He's speaking Aramaic. I'm simply saying that we're closer, I think, to the Aramaic word in the German word forgiven, which means to give up, to surrender. Father, I surrender my right, if you would, to do to them what they've done to me. I don't want to scream, crucify, crucify at them. I don't want ever to drive spikes through ankles and wrists of a Roman centurion or his soldiers. They don't understand. They don't really know what they're doing. The tragedy is they're sincere. They're just mistaken. They think he is a terrible threat to them and their way of life. They're all mixed up. Okay, those who crucified him cast lots. It's like rolling dice to see who got his clothing. People stood by watching. But the leaders scoffed at him. It's a hateful word in Aramaic. They scoffed at him, saying, well, he saved others. Let him save himself if he is the Messiah of God. And see, that's the big question. Is he the Messiah of God or not? And even now, in this 21st century, rabbis are still writing books about why he couldn't have been the one, because messiahs don't get crucified. In my Jewish Christian Dialogue group, we read one of those books every once in a while so that we can discuss how we Christians understand that writing and how Jews understand that writing. But our contention is he was the Messiah. He was the long-awaited Messiah of God. Those who are standing there at the foot of the cross screaming at him are saying, if he is, then messiahs can do anything. His chosen one, God's chosen one. The soldiers also mocked him, so the main ones mocking him are not soldiers. They're the same detractors who ranted and raved at him early that morning. They followed him out. The soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him sour wine and saying, if you are the king of the Jews, that's what they'd been told, that he'd been claiming to be king of the Jews. They don't have a clue what a Messiah is. Save yourself. There was also an inscription over him. That's why the soldiers were all mixed up, because Pilate had them right on the headboard. This is the king of the Jews. This is what we do to the king of the Jews. Okay, Luke has something here the others don't have. One of the criminals who were hanging there kept deriding him also, saying, are you not the Messiah? Save yourself and us. But the other rebuked him, saying, do you not fear Elohim, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed have been condemned justly. We're getting what we deserve for our deeds. I mean, we knew what the penalty was when we committed the crimes we've committed. But this man has done nothing wrong. And that one said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Okay, if you are the king, this can't be it, your kingdom. There must be something more. So that something more I would like to be a part of. And Jesus replied, this is only in Luke. Truly, I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise. Dr. Charles Allen preached, I thought, one of the best Easter sermons I ever heard him preach in the 7 years I was with him on this passage. Today. His take on that is, we don't languish thousands of years in a moldering tomb. Same thing that Dr. Craddock says. Whether first he comes or we go, tomorrow we meet the Lord. Meaning, when you die. When you die, you meet the Lord. Dr. Allen took this to be, you will be with me, meaning we will know each other. You will be with me. And paradise must be something beyond the grave. We don't know exactly what God has in store, but something very special. Paradise is a wonderful word. Skip to verse 50. Now there was a good and righteous man named Joseph from the Jewish town of Arimathea. He was waiting expectantly for the kingdom of God. This man went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. It was really dangerous to identify oneself as a follower at this point. There was no assurance. Pilate wouldn't say, "Oh, you're one of his? You think he was the king of the Jews? Kill him too. Start early tomorrow morning." Could have happened. He was a Jew. Pilate didn't particularly care for Jews. Then he took it down, that is the body of Jesus, wrapped it in a linen cloth, laid it in a rock-hewn tomb where no one had ever been laid. Now notice here, there's nothing about Pilate saying, "Go and be sure he's dead." We find that in John. Haven't come to it yet. For John, it was very important that Jesus have no broken bones, because John understood Jesus to be the Passover lamb, which is offered without blemish, without spot. He includes that part. We'll get to it. Be sure they're dead. And the other two had legs broken. They were ready to break Jesus' legs. Somebody said he's already dead. Just to be sure, the centurion, man in charge of 100, thrust his spear up into the side. He didn't flinch. Blood and water poured out. He's dead. You can have him. No broken bones. That was John's great concern. Okay, that's not Luke's great concern. That's not part of his story. But rather, a friend. Here, Luke does not mention that Nicodemus was a part of that. One of the gospel writers says he was. The one who came to him by night in John chapter 3. So who do you think puts Nicodemus there? John does. He hasn't forgotten that conversation in John chapter 3, and Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea will take down the body. We'll come to that. I'm simply pointing out they tell the story slightly differently here. Doesn't mean necessarily they're contradicting each other. Luke's telling it the way he thinks it ought to be told, the way it's most meaningful to him, the way he says he's read several different accounts and now he's going to write his own, so he's writing what he thinks the most important things are. It was the day of preparation, meaning for Passover and Sabbath. Okay, Jews are scurrying around before sundown on Friday. You need to be in Jerusalem sometimes today, now, modern times, just before 5 o'clock on Friday. The Hasidic folk are hustling. They're hustling. From 3 o'clock on probably. You see mothers going unusually fast with strollers and little kids, and they've been to the market. They've done, they're doing everything possible. Boom, it's going to stop at sundown on Friday. You got to get it all done. So the day of preparation, Sabbath was about to begin when the sun went down. The women who had come with him from Galilee followed. These women, of course, become very important. We've already heard about them. Luke's already told us they helped provision Jesus and the disciples. And they had no money. So these women are helping with food and shelter, so on, whatever they could provide for them. And they've not left Jesus for a moment here. They have followed. And now when they see somebody taking his body down, they want to know what's going to happen to it. So they see him placed in the tomb. They see the great stone rolled over the face of it. Then they returned to wherever they were staying. These women were from Galilee. Okay, not from Jerusalem. They had to be staying somewhere. They went back wherever that was and prepared spices and ointments. But there was no time to do anything. The sun was setting, and they were all observant Jews. So on the Sabbath they rested according to the commandment. That's what the Bible says. The Hebrew Scriptures Friday sundown, Saturday sundown, no work. And then Luke continues right on. Remember, he doesn't write chapter and verse. The versification took place centuries later. So just immediately after they returned to wherever they were, because it was the Sabbath, then on the first day of the week. And for Jews, of course, that's Sunday. And if you look at your calendar, it's still written that way. Sunday is the first day of the week. Monday is the first day of our work week for most of us. Not for Jews. Okay, go back to work Sunday morning. First day of the week, early dawn. They came to the tomb, taking the spices they had prepared. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb. But when they went in, they did not find the body. While they were perplexed about this, suddenly two men in dazzling clothes stood beside them. Always those who've been touched or sent from the Almighty, dazzlingly white. The women were terrified. In the Bible, and this is pretty much true from Genesis to Revelation, when a person is experiencing a theophany, that is a revealing of God, if they sense that the Almighty is here, they're terrified. Dr. Fred Craddock says it's sort of like walking under one of those highly charged electrical wires overhead sometimes. You can hear them humming. You know, it's that. The power is so close, so very close. Okay. They were terrified, bowed their faces to the ground. But the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? Jesus," he's implying, "is not one of the dead. He is not here, but has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee that the Son of Man must be handed over." God didn't kill him. But Peter would say at Pentecost, God offered him up. You could accept him as Messiah. You didn't. You rejected his being Messiah, and you killed him. Okay, he was handed over for humans to decide who he was, how he should be received. He told you he would be handed over, be crucified, on the third day, rise again. Then they remembered, by George, if he didn't, and returning from the tomb, implying that they must have been staying where the other disciples were, the men. Returning from the tomb, they told all this to the 11 and to all the rest. I mean, even more than the 11. Judas, of course, was dead by this time. And who were they? Luke says, you know, Mary of Magdala, Joanna, Mary, the mother of James, and the other women with them who told this to the apostles. See, here, doctor, is the word apostle again instead of disciple. They are called apostles here, those who are being sent out. But these words seem to them an idle tale. The men did not believe them. I mean, they've never seen anybody raised from the dead before. I know there are instances where Jesus restored people. The disciples weren't sure just what that was when they saw it occur. They know Jesus is dead. They know how deadly crucifixion is. But Peter got up and ran to the tomb. Stooping and looking in, he saw the linen cloths by themselves. No body, in other words. Then he went home. Now, he doesn't mean back to Capernaum, means wherever they were staying in Jerusalem, amazed at what had happened. Who ran to the tomb after the women told? Peter. When we come to John's Gospel, 2 run. What's the name of this 4th Gospel? John. So who do you think runs to the tomb with Peter? John. And Peter walks in, and he's still confused, and John walks in and knows the Lord has been raised. Interesting way that it's told. We don't believe John, the disciple, wrote the gospel, but somebody who loved him very much. So much that he never calls him John in the 4th Gospel. You'll see that. He calls him the disciple whom Jesus loved. The one Jesus loved. Because obviously the writer thinks John's the greatest thing that's ever happened, second only to Jesus for him. Okay. Luke here has a story the other 3 do not have. Now, on that same day, 2 of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. Remember that Pilgrims have come from all over the territory. Observant Jews have come to Jerusalem for Passover. It's over. First day of the new work week. We've got to go home, go to work. They're walking along with hundreds of other people, streaming out of Jerusalem, all the roads going out, talking with each other about all these things that had happened, trying to figure out what it all meant, you see. And while they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them. But their eyes were kept from recognizing him. He said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad. One of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place there in these days?" Obviously, Jesus is walking away from Jerusalem, as are they. So they think he's got a hometown out there somewhere he's going to. He's a stranger, they think, to the city. Otherwise, he'd be staying in the city. They don't recognize him. So Jesus goes along by asking, "What things?" And they replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priest and leaders," that's important to remember, because when you come to John's gospel, he's just going to say the Jews, the Jews, the Jews. But all who followed Jesus were Jews. He means the leaders, what Luke has here at the end of his gospel. How our chief priest and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. Notice the implication here that really the chief priest and the leaders were responsible for his being crucified. We had hoped he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes! And besides all this, it's now the third day since these things took place. Moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said. Now notice here, Luke does say more than one went. It only mentioned Peter before, but now it says some of them. John says, well, of course, it was John that went with Peter. Here just some. So more than one, more than Peter. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see him. Then he said to them, "How foolish you are. How slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory? Then beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself in all the scriptures." Now, if you were here when Rabbi Zimmerman gave our presentations, he stopped just short of telling you that Jesus was one of those in Israel's history where the rejected one became the reconciler. He told us story after story in the Hebrew Scriptures about the rejected one becoming the reconciler. He quoted scriptures showing that when Isaac was almost offered up by his father, he was scared of that crazy old man, the rabbi said, and ran to his brother Ishmael, the rejected one. And when Abraham died, they came to bury their father, the rejected one, and the chosen one, Isaac. He told you Esau was the rejected one, Jacob the embraced one, and how the rejected one, riding with 400 men, jumps off his horse, runs to his brother, embraces him, the rejected one. I mean, Zimmerman was connecting the dots for you until he got right down to Jesus and said the benediction. But Luke is saying, that's right. That's right. Over and over. And of course, finally it comes to Isaiah, second portion, the one who's in captivity in Babylon, who talks of Israel as being the suffering servant. That Israel as a nation must be that reconciler of the world. We rejected ones, carried into slavery again, this time in Babylon, must be the reconciler of the world. But for us, of course, it never was done so well as in Jesus of Nazareth, the rejected one. So that's what Luke is focusing on here. Okay? That Jesus interpreted to them the things about himself in all the Scriptures. As they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on, but they urged him strongly. This is a really strong word in Greek. It's almost taking him by the hand. They dragged him into the house. They almost compelled him to, please come on inside. It's not going to be safe after dark on these roads. They urged him strongly, saying, stay with us. It's almost evening. The day is now nearly over. So he went in to stay with them. And when he was at the table with them, and here he does what he did when the 5,000 were fed. Here he does what every observant Jewish family does every Friday night. Every Friday night. They light the candles, and they break the bread, and they take a sip of wine. Okay? He took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. They've seen this done all their lives. They're observant Jews. But there was something special this time. Their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he was gone. They said to each other, were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the Scriptures to us? That is, wasn't that all resonating? Yes, he was right. He was right. That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem. It's after sundown. It's dangerous. There are bad people out there in the dark. They go back 7 miles to the city of Jerusalem and start pounding on the door. They found the 11 and their companions, compani, those who break bread with them, gathered together. They were saying, the Lord is risen indeed. He has appeared to Simon. Then they told what had happened on the road and how he had been made known to them in breaking of the bread. Next week is October 9. We're almost through with what we're going to do in Luke's Gospel. So I'm putting chapter 24. We'll do a little bit more here with 36. And then I'm going to show you the gospel that's quite different from the first 3. If you haven't been to church, we got handbells and choirs and all kinds of good things happening. It's Worldwide Communion Sunday too.